Hello, everyone, and welcome to Level the Field Leadership. I am very, very excited to have you join in today because we have an amazing guest that I know you're going to get a lot of information from. For those of you, if this is your first episode, my name is Dr. Rachel Gallardo, and I'm so very thankful that you've chosen to spend some time while you're running errands, driving in the car, cleaning the house, whatever, listening to something that can help develop your leadership a little bit more. I do believe that workplace burnout is very real, and anything we can do to reduce burnout and fatigue in our leadership roles will have a positive impact on us, on our teams, on our families, on our homes, the whole nine yards. But you didn't come here to listen to my voice. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. Danita Cummins is a career and business coach with nearly 30 years in the Department of Defense, where she led teams in special operations and advanced technology. So she's not somebody to be messed with. In her book, Promise Over Purpose, she encourages readers to shift from purpose chasing to a fulfilling life grounded in God's promises. Danita is also the founding director of the Alpha Life Pregnancy Center, supporting women through pregnancy decisions, parenting, and loss. As the host of the Entrusted to Lead podcast, she engages in transformative conversations around leadership, faith, and purpose, drawing from her experience in business, ministry, and government. Her coaching helps leaders and organizations reach their full potential through one-on-one meaningful guidance. Danita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me. Happy New Year.
You too, you too. And as if you're a returning listener, you know I like to base each of our episodes around scripture, and one that Danita said really inspired her was Jeremiah 31:3. The Lord appeared to us in the past, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. So, Danita, I mean, aside from this amazing background that you have and all of these wonderful things that you're doing,
Oh,
tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what kind of got you to this point of from a leadership standpoint.
sure. That's really great. I am originally from Oklahoma, so I'm married, have four kids. Most of them, all but one, have gone off into the adulting world. So my husband and I have one more that's graduating this year, and we are grandparents. So we're in that season of our life. When you kind of say 30 years, people are like, "That's a long time."
Sure.
There's that's kind of my heart is obviously my family and my husband and our faith. So I started out, joined the military, and I like to tell people that the military gives you some of the most phenomenal leadership training at a very young age, right? Because at a very, very young junior grade, you're responsible for pretty important, mission sets, millions to billions of dollars worth of equipment, and a lot of hearts. And I always say hearts are heavy. So I attest my kind of leadership journey and training to being in the military for almost 9 years, and then moving over as a defense contractor, and then working for the Department of Army, and spent several years in special operations in the Special Operations Command. And that's a completely different level of leadership, and like emotional intelligence and all of those things that we deal with. So that's really kind of where I, grew up in my career. And then about 14 years ago, I started serving in bivocational ministry. So I got to see really at grassroots level what it's like to equip and empower teams, individuals, right? And from just this intrinsic motivation perspective, right? So they're the people who come to the ministry, the people who serve, they're not there because they get a paycheck, right? They're coming because they have a heart for the mission. And that just looks different in leadership, and it looks different in our daily life. It looks different in how we approach conflict. So over the years, I've had to adjust that right lens of leadership. And so I think both of those venues have really allowed me, and being a mom, and going through a lot of things, 9 deployments that my husband and I navigated. So we went through a lot of hard stuff for a long time. Just giving me this great heart and empathy for people, and the leadership. So that's kind of where um, kind of where my anchor is, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first and foremost, thank you for your service. I mean, I can't
Oh,
imagine what
thanks.
that navigating all of that had to look like, and just the sacrifices that you and your family made. It, thank you doesn't even begin to cover it, but I hope you know that that is sincere.
Thank you.
In From a special ops perspective, there's a lot of strategic planning, a lot of decision making that
Hmm.
goes into navigating whatever your mission is that you're trying to accomplish. So,
Yeah.
how do you when you have these competing priorities and you have different pressures that are coming on, like how do you navigate those waters so that way you can make the best decision possible for your team?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I'll start with saying that strategy is a learned, right, skill. So we all have different perspectives in how we see opportunities and how we look at the world. So when I do leadership coaching or strategic planning workshops now in my consulting and coaching business, I start with that place. Like, so strategy is a mindset. It is a big picture, and so that's just like learning emotional intelligence or how we deal with conflict or any of the things. So that's the first thing I say, because sometimes strategy can be very complicated and it's overwhelming. So we try to simplify strategy as much as we can. And I think for leaders who are in organizations who are constantly trying to make decisions, right, we're always assessing risk, whether we know it or not.
Mm,
We're always trying to mitigate risk every single day. We do it every day with our schedules, right? Like I get up and I have to mitigate risk. Do I take this meeting? Do I get the groceries? Like, what's the
right.
risk? The risk is we don't have milk. So, how big of a risk is that? We
Right.
do it all day long. In the military, we do it, up front and really loudly, right? So we have a lot of risk matrices and all of the things that we do. But so I think inherently as leaders, we do it. We know how to do it, but it's just we don't really know that we're doing it every day. So
Sure.
that's the first part I kind of offer about strategy. And I think that clarity is probably the most important tool that I offer to leaders. We're never as clear as we think we are. And so that's
Mhm.
the other piece, that we're always constantly being more clear, and communication, like, which, I think you know a lot about. We're not as clear when we communicate as we think we are. So the first piece that I often try to help leaders start with is the vision, right? And we talk a lot about that in leadership and strategy, but what does that really look like? So
Mhm.
getting really clear on what our vision is and what our target is, and then having really important metrics to be able to evaluate whether we get there. So I think, just like as a general thing, it's what's the vision for this organization? What's the vision for this team? What does a win look like for you? How do you even define that? If you
Mhm.
can't define a win, if you can't define what that looks like, then how do you know if you ever got there? Right. And
Mhm.
so those are some of the upfront questions that I ask leaders. If they can quantify that, then that's great. Then we can start to build an implementation plan and, right, KPIs and ways to measure it. But if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to know if you ever got there.
Sure, sure. And for those of you that are not familiar with KPI, that's a key performance indicator. So it's some key aspect of your organization that you look at to make sure that all of these things that you're doing are actually doing what you intended for them to do. So I wanted to clarify that
That's
component
good.
for those that might be listening.
Yeah, that's good.
How do you communicate this strategic plan to different stakeholders? Because I have found in my experience from a leadership standpoint, everybody kind of sees the organization from their niche and from their
Mm,
role that they have in the organization. And so sometimes it can be hard to get buy-in across the company because, the people in this department don't understand this part of it over here, but everybody has to, it's a machine. We all have to work together to make this work. So how do you communicate that plan knowing that everybody kind of has their own personal motivations that they want to accomplish?
sure. I think there is a place from a leadership perspective where there has to be great empathy always in that space, right? And what we're motivated by. And so our motivators aren't always known to us, really, right? So we're motivated by fear or risk or these other things like we talked about. We might not always know that's underneath the surface. So, and then change is really hard, right? It just is. There's a lot of writings about it, psychology of it. So I think when we are trying to set a strategy and have clear vision for stakeholders, there is we have to approach that first from a place of empathy always. And then we share that vision. We share what we think, when looks like. We share what, how we're going to evaluate that. And then we have to trust and empower the people in our organization to do the thing that they need to do because they're invariably the expert. And so that's where I think we sometimes, fail, or there's conflict or tension. Because if we're a visionary leader and I'm saying, hey, my strategy is to increase revenue by 25% at the end of this year, right? We want to sell X amount of widgets, or we want to build X amount of new customers. The people who are going to do that are the business development and the operations team and the marketing team and the sales team, right? And so then you have to turn around and trust them and say, okay, how can we make this a reality? And then listen when they give you really honest feedback like, hey, boss, we are going to need to invest these resources. The system won't allow us to scale. We have these challenges. But a lot of times that conversation doesn't really happen. And so then there's this frustration level, you know? So it's like, hey, I hear what you're saying that you want, but the reality is I don't have the resources, or I'm not empowered to make that a reality. And so the more
Right.
we can be transparent, I think, as leaders, and have those open conversations and just really say, this is where we're going. um, is this, how do we get there, right? And we have shared ownership, we have shared, and it all really, I think, at the end of the day, comes back down to trust, really,
Yeah.
you know. So I
Yeah.
think that's a big piece of it, is that dynamic, fluid conversation in an organization of trusting your people, and then having that feedback loop, which is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, there's 2 questions that I ask anytime I meet with, somebody on my team. I ask them, "What do I need to do to help support you, with what it is
Hmm.
that we're trying to accomplish?" But then I also ask them, "What do I need to stop doing because I'm getting in your way?" And I think
Mm,
too often we as leaders, we wanna constantly do things, but not realizing, like, we're the ones that's causing the delay because we keep sticking our noses where it shouldn't be because we should be trusting our team to take care of it.
yeah, that's so good. I love that second question.
Yeah.
That's so powerful, because it really does give the person on the other side the authority, right, to express those things, where you open up yourself, the
Yeah.
vulnerability as a leader, to be like, hey, I acknowledge that I might be doing something that's not helping. Please
Right.
tell me. Yeah, because I
Right.
genuinely do want to know. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't want to mess this up.
one time I asked that question, and this was many years ago, and the person said, "Well, your personality is just very intense." And I was like,
Mm,
"Okay, so I need to you're telling me I just need to relax a little bit." They're like, "Yeah, I got it. If I have a question, I'll come to you." I was like, "That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'm sure you are not the only one that thinks that, and so I will implement that with everybody going forward." And it can be really helpful question. And it also, I think, takes the burden off of us as leaders as well to know that we don't have to do something. Like, just
right.
stop. It's okay. Let it be. Somebody else is going to take care of it.
Yeah, and I think in organizations, and we're all doing this right now, right? It's all new year, new strategy, new vision,
Hmm.
goals and objectives. So we're kind of clean slate. But I think that we are constantly doing a whole bunch of things that we don't necessarily have to do. And so then we look at our days and our plates are really full, and we get super hyper focused on some maybe very small nuanced thing. But then you have to really lend, that's why strategy is hard, I think, because it really, you have to shift your whole perspective and zoom out and say, okay, wait, what's the big picture? What are we doing? Do
Yeah.
these 12 things that we're spending 80% of our time on really move the needle? Like, or if it doesn't, then stop doing them. Like, you have the authority, right, as a leader, and you have the responsibility. That's the
Right.
other part. Like, it's your responsibility to say, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, and I think we don't. We just continue, and that's
Yeah.
in the government. We spend a lot of time holding on to things because
Sure.
we have this scarcity mindset, right? Fear,
Sure.
like we might
Sure.
need it one day. So,
Let's get off the hamster wheel. This is not working.
yeah, yeah. Let it go. Yeah,
Right.
it'll be
Right.
okay.
So along that thread, there are times where leaders will have to make a very major, like a major pivot for whatever reason. Maybe it's some external factor, maybe it's some sort of legislation that was recently
Mm,
passed, just an industry change overall that's happened. And so
sure.
how do you number one, how do you make that transition? Like, how do you pivot on a dime? But then also, how can you make sure the organization stays true to its vision when it's having to do this huge upheaval from a change standpoint?
Sure. I think that the first part, I always like to say it's like a 3 to 1 metric, right? So for every 1 hour you're going to do the work, it's like there's probably a 3 hour time of, we needed to plan, we needed to assess, we needed to clarify, we needed to iterate on that thing before we actually implement it. And we don't do that, right?
Mhm.
And to your point, we get locked in this like response mode where we're just responding to whatever comes in our inbox every day.
Yeah.
And so invariably we don't have a plan. And you can't, as a leader, lead an organization without clarity and a plan. And so I work a lot with organizational leaders, CEOs or founders. That's a lot of what I do in my consulting and coaching business. Is it's very much like, okay, let's zoom out, let me help you see big picture, and let me help you come up with a plan, because you're in the middle of it. And so it's just almost hard for you to see all the pieces. And so if you have some kind of change, whatever that is, either it's internal, you're guiding or driving the change because you have a product market issue, your product no longer fits in the market, or like you said, policy legislation, then you have to set aside some really deep work time to plan that out and to look at it and bring in your experts and have that shared ownership, right? And so again, it goes back to casting the vision as a leader and saying, hey, we have to do this, like compliance, we have to be, we have to comply with whatever. How do we implement this? How do we put this together? And be very intentional, about setting those conversations, even if it's daily. Like I work a lot in technology development, so we do daily scrums, right? And we've kind of um, adopted those models in service, non-IT industries. But every day it's a 15-minute scrum where you're just like, hey, what did you work on yesterday? What was the last 24 hours look like? What's today look like? Where are the things that are blocking you? How can I help you knock those down? Right. But we just have to have a continual conversation, I think, number one. And we have to continue to open up that door for transparency, number two, right? We're in vulnerability.
Mhm.
And then there are a lot of change models that are really great, like leading change, right? John Cotter, for example, has a great book that he wrote years ago, which is still used in lots of organizations and leadership. And he's got an 8-step framework, right? So for anyone who's like, hey, we have a change coming up, but I don't even know what to do. Like there's a framework for that, right?
Mhm.
Don't make it up on the fly. Like there's a framework.
Yeah.
And so that's the other offering that I try to give too. Like, what's the goal? What problem are we trying to solve? Let's use a existing framework, right? We don't have to create new work and new things. And then how do we build in those pieces and then continue to have that conversation over time? I think those are the biggest pieces that I see that are missing.
Yeah. So when an organization implements change or if a leader is doing something change, and I think too often we think it has to be this huge thing that
Right.
we have to implement throughout the entire organization. And it can actually be very small changes that can be really effective. But how do
Yeah.
you know how do you know that that change that you made is working? Like what are some things that you can look to understand that the plan is working?
So I'll give you a very tactical example. Just for like in our pregnancy center, we are increasing our client base, probably by 200% in the last year, right? So the
Wow.
framework, the processes, the workflows, all the things that we have in the background can only support X amount of people. And so when you scale, right, things start getting all messed up, things start falling through the cracks. So
Sure.
we have to define what do we value? If we value correct data, we value our data systems being updated, then how do we make that a reality? Is that happening? So then we do a quick audit. We're like, we need to have our authoritative data source to be accurate because that's where we pull all our numbers from. That's where all of our donor information comes from, right? That's
Right.
where all of our grant reporting comes from. And we go in and we look at the system and it's not updated. And there are, lots of data fields. So then we ask the question, is it a process issue or a training issue? Right? So
Yeah.
then we start to evaluate why is the problem occurring, and then if it's both, who needs to have the authority to do that, and then do we need to change our process in order to be able to make the data, get the data updated. So it sounds something like super nuanced, like you log in every day and the system's not updated, but it has these second, third order effects. And so even something like that with a really small team, you still have to go back to what problem are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve and make sure that the data gets updated, you know, to this percent, 80%, 90%, whatever it is that we need to achieve. And then we start to look through that. That could be 5 people on your team. You know what I mean? That could be like a very small internal database that you guys are just
Yeah.
managing your workflow, but it's
Right.
still all of you coming together and doing that same process. And then when you look at it, you make the changes, you say, hey, this is what we think the new process should be. And then we dry run it a couple of times, right? We beta test it. Like, did that work? No, that doesn't make sense. Or, have somebody on the other side of the team, like, read this and make sure this policy makes sense to you because we are always working on communication and clarity, and then get that feedback and then iterate on it. So I just think there's this like very agile framework that we use in system development or in software development, right? And that same agile framework can be used in every organization, especially when you're trying to like lead and manage change, big or small.
Mhm. Mhm. And then how do you know the plan is working? If
Yeah,
you're
you just
getting
have to
the results that you're
yeah,
getting, that you're
you have
wanting?
to assess. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the intended goal. So then, like in this example, right, we'll use it. So if our goal is to increase and make sure that our data is correct or to 80% or 90%, then we iterate that. So we say in a week or 2 weeks, we're going to come back, we're going to audit the system once the new system or process was implemented, and we're going to look and see. And if it is, then good. We assume, right? Assume
Hmm.
that the
Hmm.
process is working. If it's not, we continue to iterate on it and to say, okay, well, what piece was missing? Um,
Hmm.
and garner that feedback from your team. And I think that's we no organization or team is a set it and forget it. And a
Right,
team is two people. I say that a lot when I do like organizational coaching. A team is two people. Like you and your husband are a team, right?
right, right,
So it's the same model. And we don't set it and forget it. We don't. We're constantly working on it. We're
yep,
constantly looking and assessing where are we going, and then how can we make
right,
that better.
right. Yeah, how often do you adjust the plan? As often as you have to.
Yeah.
Because nothing is stagnant, nothing is constant. Things are constantly changing. Your customer is changing, the industry is changing, the environment in which you operate is changing. Every time you hire somebody new, that shifts your workplace culture just a
Yes.
little bit. So you do have to constantly adjust the plan each time those shifts occur.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I would offer to that is expectation management, is
Mm.
just knowing, like when we walk into a situation and we're like, this is really hard, there's a mindset, right? Where you're like, oh, this is actually how it's going to be. Kind of like you go through the grieving process and you're like,
Yeah,
acceptance, and you're like, okay, this is how it's going to be. Then I
right,
make a choice. Do I want to stay or do I want to go?
right,
But I don't think we really talk a lot about that in leadership development. Like, you just assume you're like, here's my job. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to hold, this space. And
right,
if you have the expectation that that it's going to be dynamic or fluid, and that change is going to be, it's an important part of the evolution, then just think you have more acceptance for that when it
right.
comes. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're a leader and let's say you're new in your position and you walk in and you're just like, wow, there are so many things that I have to do. I think my word of advice, and Danita, I mean, let me know if you
Yeah.
support this or not. Address one issue at a time. Recognize you're not going to be able to fix everything at once, but as long as you
Mm,
are being consistent and little by little, your message is very clear and you're getting everybody to see. Because quite frankly, whenever you go into a new role, people are going to be looking at you to be like, okay, what is this person like?
right.
What makes them tick? Are they consistent? Well, they told this person this, but they told me that. Like they're going to be sizing you up for lack of a better term. And as long as you are consistent day in and day out, you're saying the same thing, you're saying the same message, you're holding everybody to the same standards, you'll start to see those changes happen. Don't try to change everything overnight because it's not gonna that's not a good way to go into it.
That's right. That's right. And I think I read a book years ago by Jordan Rayner, and he writes about the biblical, like the biblical basis of work. I think is what it is. So he's written a few books, but in one of his books that Redeeming Your Time, I think that was a book. But anyway, it says in there that God knows that you will pass away from this life with things on your to-do list. Like God
Mm,
knows that. And so for me, that was very freeing as a leader and as a mom and as just, a person, because I was like, oh, you're right. I will. I
yeah,
have 27 things on my to-do list, and then I don't know what tomorrow will bring.
right, right,
So I think what that has really, for me, has really caused me to get very clear with my teams and with myself on what's the most important thing that we need to be working on in this season. We can do 100 things. We can do 100 things,
yeah,
but with the time and resources that we have and the goal we're trying to accomplish today, what are the most important things that we need to work on today? So yeah, you'll walk into an organization and invariably probably see 50 things. And it is very much discernment and wisdom in terms of and talking to your team and just saying, hey, what are your biggest pain points, right? Like,
right,
don't assume because, candidly, we don't. And
right,
um
right,
and let them tell you, hey, we really need help on these three things. And then together as a team, you come up with a solution. So that
yeah,
works so much better than it's downward directed, like you
right,
will go and do. So,
right, right. So, what strategies do you recommend for leaders to help ensure that their team does stay motivated and, has that renewed sense of purpose as they're doing just the day in, day out, mundane change? aspects of life? How do you keep
Yeah.
them motivated?
I think it obviously depends on the people and the environment that you work in. So, I mean, there's not a one set it and forget it. I think that when I were used to work in a team and there was an office, we all came and we sat and we still do like in the pregnancy center and with my clients and stuff. So there's still that, face to face, sit down next to each other, have a cup of coffee. I do still think that's hugely important because we're humans, we're not islands, right? So our hearts, I go back to the leadership piece of hearts are heavy, and so every single human being wants to be seen and fully known for who they are. Like we want that. I have this complete 100% belief that every single person who comes into our organization genuinely wants to do the best job that they can. Like we do, right?
Mhm.
And so knowing your team is super important, and knowing, what's motivating them or what is important to them is super important. And so throughout the year, those touch points and those conversations, like, where are you going? Like, what's important to you? Like, what is this job like actually helping you get to where you want to be in your life, in your career? And if it's not, I want to help you find that place, right? I
Right,
want to help you lead well. Like I genuinely care about you as a person.
right.
And that piece is important. You can't do that with 100 people, but you can do that with 5,
Sure.
you can do that with 5. So I think that if we're leading an organization and it's not volatile, there's not a lot of change, it's pretty static. Like we know coming back this year, we're going to accomplish the 10 things that we had on our board, and we might get 1 or 2 new things, but we're kind of on a steady state as an organizational growth. Then you might have more time to really work on, people and what's going on in their life and professional development, and, and the things that are, working on your team better.
Sure.
If you're in a high state of vulnerability and your team is in a high state of change, you probably don't have time for that right now, right?
Mhm.
And so just assessing where you are, but then still having those touch points where you're still listening to them, you're still hearing like, hey, we're going this way. I know it's hard.
Mhm.
When I worked in special operations, there was a project we worked on that had never been done before. And I remember sitting at the table with what I say heroes and legends. And these guys did things that, heroes and legends. I did their Excel spreadsheets for them. So I was not on the battlefield. But I remember sitting in the room one day and the leader of the group was so frustrated because he couldn't get the thing done, right? And it was so hard. And I remember just sitting with him afterwards and I said to him, I said, this has never been done before. Like, you're literally doing something that no one has ever done before. It's
Right,
going to be hard. We're
right.
not going to have the answers. It's okay, And I think that as leaders, it's just like that place where you let them breathe and you're like, oh, it is hard. And you're like, it's okay, you know?
Yeah,
So I think that's a piece. And people are, it just for me and my leadership journey, that's like the most important thing, is like seeing the people, making sure that they know that they matter, making sure that you do care, that you do.
mhm,
I know it's hard. I know you're sacrificing. I know you're staying up late. I know you're working on this really hard thing.
yeah,
Um, and I'm, not going to leave you.
right, right. Yeah, seeing the people on our teams, more holistically, I think is important, and recognizing too that, we have them for 8 hours a day, but then there's this whole 16 other hours where they're, spouses, their daughters, their, their nieces, their nephews, their aunts, their uncles, just remembering that component of it. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be just about work. Like, hey, you told me
Right.
that you were going to, your son had a big soccer game. How did that go? Like, just asking them how things are going in general. If people know that they are supported and they know that they're valued as a human being, I
That's
think
right.
that will help them to thrive as well. Not get so focused on what is your job description and are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, recognizing that they're people and asking them about how they are person to person.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that all those pieces and parts of us make our organizations better, right? They just
Yeah.
do. Like my personal health, my mental health, my emotional health, my spiritual health, like that makes me a better whole person. And we like, years ago, we would say, well, it's just business, right? It's not
Yeah.
personal. And
Yeah.
I completely violently disagree with that model because I'm like, no, I bring all of myself to work every day. I bring
Right.
my good, I bring my hard, I bring my sad, I bring my whole
Right.
heart to the work every day. And I think as leaders, if we can change our perspective and see that and have empathy for that, you know, then it really does make our teams and our organization stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Wow, this is, I don't know if anybody else needs to hear this, but this is just a nice reminder that I know I need to keep for myself. And I just, there's so much value that's there. And I hope that everybody listening will understand that, change is a process and you have to just embrace it as it comes, make your adjustments, look at those key performance indicators, make sure that you're moving in the right direction. And if you're not, do something different. And if you are, keep doing that thing. But this is kind of the point of the episode where I turn it over to the guests and I like to call it the shameless plug. So if you have, any sort of speaking engagements or website or book or anything like that that you would like to talk about, I'm going to turn the floor over to you for your shameless plug, Danita.
Oh, thanks so much. That's very kind. I will just offer I think the best thing in my life right now that I would share is I did write and publish a book last year called Promise Over Purpose: Unveiling the Path to a Peace-Filled Life. And it is really for faith-driven leaders who are really struggling with that place of asking the question, what is my purpose? And how do I reconcile all the hard things in my life, pain or performance or these different things with this everlasting love, like we talked about in the beginning, just knowing that God's promises are for me, that they are available to me. And so instead of living in the life of anxiety where we're chasing after purpose as teams and organizational leaders, how can we reshift our focus to really live in the promises of God every single day? And so that's that's where my heart is. So I'll be traveling to Costa Rica actually next week to teach a workshop on it with leaders down there who are leading missions and stuff in Costa Rica. So super excited about that. And excited to see what that workshop turns out to be as I'm continuing to build that out this year to really help teams understand how to live in the promise every day. And then how do you lead from the promise, right? And how does that really solidify our teams? So that's my thing I'll share. They can find it at promiseoverpurpose.com. So they can pop over to promiseoverpurpose.com. And then if there's anything related to business coaching and consulting, again, I love to help people zoom out and help them figure out where the pain points are. It's great to have a unbiased person kind of come in and help you see over your shoulder. So that's what we do in our coaching and consulting business. So they can find those at my website, danitacummins.com.
Nice. Thank you so much. I love that phrase,
Yeah.
pain points. Like what are those sticky points that you have to get rid of. Well,
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for all of the information that you shared and for taking the time out of your day to talk to me and to share the wonderful years of experience that you have as far as leading and guiding leaders to make them and their organizations that much better. I'm going to put all of your show notes or all of the social media information, I should say, all the website information in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're not connected to her, you're really missing out. There's just so much information that can help you grow as a leader, just to become physically, mentally, like she said, emotionally, spiritually healthier, and support your team, support you in meeting whatever goals you want to accomplish. If you did like what you heard, please hit the subscribe button to continue to receive new content. And I would encourage you to share this episode with somebody else that you think might need to hear it. You can tag me, you can tag Danita. We're happy to come alongside this individual to help support them as well. But we shouldn't be doing things alone on an island. Leadership is a
Mm.
journey, and we don't have to walk this journey alone. So, Danita, thank you so very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And for everybody listening, remember you are made to be a leader right where you are, wherever you are leading. And the things that we talked about today can help you develop the roots of your leadership as you weather whatever storms might be brewing. But take care of yourself, take care of your team. You can 1000% do this. And until next time.